I slammed the cellar door shut behind me, the iron bolt sliding home with a clang that echoed up the stairs like a gunshot in the still night. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat a reminder that Pa's lessons had gone too far this time, farther than the sharp words or the belt, into something twisted that made my stomach churn. Down here in the damp Utah earth, under the Harrington cabin, the air hung thick with the scent of lye soap and something sharper, like blood mixed with milk. I wasn't alone. The shadows shifted in the lantern light, and I knew Eliza was waiting. Her small form huddled by the birthing table we'd pieced together from old barn wood. "Eliza," I whispered, my voice cracking as I crept forward, boots scraping against the packed dirt floor. She didn't move at first, just clutched the bundle in her arms tighter, her face pale as the moonlight filtering through the high barred window. At 14, she was already carrying the weight of Pa's perfection, swollen belly, eyes hollow from the nights he'd locked us down here to purify us, to breed out the weaknesses he saw in Ma's side of the family. I'd tried to run once last harvest, but the desert stretched endless, and Pa's rifle had brought me back with a limp I still felt in the cold. She looked up then, her lips trembling. "He's coming, Caleb. I heard the floorboards creak upstairs. The new one's not right, crying all wrong like it's got thorns in its throat." The baby in her arms let out a weak, rasping wail that cut through me sharper than any knife. Pa's dream was a family of the pure, untainted by the world's flaws. No sickness, no doubt, no impure blood from the Mormon settlers or the Paiute traders who'd passed through our land. He'd started with Ma, forcing her into this basement ritual after the war took his brother. Convinced God had whispered the way to build a stronger line, now it was us, his children, bound by his madness in 1864's unforgiving frontier. I knelt beside her, prying the blanket back just enough to see. The infant's skin was mottled, eyes too wide and unblinking, as if it had stared into something it shouldn't. "We can't let him take it," I said, my hands shaking as I reached for the lantern. The flame danced, casting jagged shadows on the walls lined with jars, specimens, Pa called them. Tiny forms preserved in fluid from failed attempts. My mind raced. We'd hidden tools before, a chisel from the forge, but tonight the risk was higher. Pa's footsteps thudded above, deliberate like he knew. Eliza's grip tightened on the child. "What if it's perfect, Caleb? What if we are?" Her voice was a mix of fear and that eerie hope Pa had drilled into us, but I saw the doubt flicker in her eyes, the same doubt that had made me smash the lock on the side door last week, only for it to jam shut again in the rain. Footsteps paused at the top of the stairs. I blew out the lantern, plunging us into black, my breath held as I pulled her close. The bolt rattled, and in the dark I whispered the plan we'd half formed. Wait for him to descend, then strike for the window, baby or no. But as the door creaked open, spilling yellow light down the steps, I wondered if we'd ever see the stars above ground again. I gripped the lantern tighter, its flame flickering like a heartbeat in the damp air as the wooden stairs creaked under my boots. The basement door had given way too easily after Elias pried it open with that rusted crowbar. His face pale but set in that stubborn line he got when he wouldn't back down. "We end this tonight," he'd whispered upstairs, but down here words felt swallowed by the shadows. My sister Clara trailed behind, her breath shallow, clutching the hem of her apron like it could shield her from whatever waited below. The steps ended abruptly, dumping us into a chamber that smelled of earth and something sharper. Bleach, maybe, or lye, mixed with the metallic tang of fear. Stone walls pressed in, rough-hewn from the Utah hillside, and in the lantern's glow, shelves lined one side, jars glinting like eyes. Elias moved first, his broad shoulders casting jagged shadows as he scanned the room. "Look for papers, anything," he muttered, his voice low, urgent. I was the one who'd found the journal in Father's study that afternoon, hidden in a false drawer, its pages filled with sketches of faces, measurements of limbs, notes on purity of line. Harrington blood, it said, perfected through selection. My stomach twisted at the memory. Father had always preached strength, survival in this frontier, but this was madness. Clara whimpered softly, pointing to a corner where a low table stood covered in a stained cloth. "Elias, don't—" But he was already there, pulling the fabric away with a rasp that echoed too loud. Underneath lay tools. Scalpels glinted beside vials of cloudy liquid and a ledger bound in cracked leather. I stepped closer, heart pounding, and flipped it open. Entries in Father's precise script, births dated back years. Children listed not by names but codes, H1, H2 crossed out if they failed criteria. One note chilled me. Subject 7 shows promise. Isolate for breeding trial. Breeding. The word clawed at my throat. We'd grown up hearing whispers of the family's legacy. How grandfather Harrington had fled east with secrets of improvement. But this was no legacy. This was a cage. A scuffle from the far wall snapped us alert. Elias swung the lantern, light spilling over a heavy iron door set into the stone. Bolted from our side, but ajar just enough for a draft to whisper through. What was that? Clara's voice cracked, her hand finding mine, cold and trembling. I pulled her back as Elias approached, crowbar raised. The sound came again, faint like a shuffle, then a muffled cry. Not animal, human, childlike, my mind raced. The journal mentioned current subjects and hidden away. Father was upstairs still, praying or pretending, but if he found us here. Elias wedged the crowbar into the door's seam, muscles straining. On 3, he grunted. We counted silently, and with a groan of metal it swung inward. Darkness yawned beyond, thicker than before. But the lantern caught edges, bars like a cell. Straw scattered on the floor and huddled in the corner. A small figure, skinny, pale, eyes wide and feral in the sudden light. Not more than 10, dressed in rags, staring at us like we were ghosts. Please, it whispered, voice raw. Don't let him take me back. Clara gasped, rushing forward despite my grab for her arm. Oh God, it's a boy. Elias, he's one of them. The child flinched but didn't run, his gaze flicking between us, calculating. I knelt slowly, extending a hand, the lantern shaking in my other. Up close, he looked wrong. Too perfect in features, like one of Father's sketches, but hollowed by hunger. We're not like him, I said softly, fighting the bile rising. We're getting you out. But even as I spoke, footsteps thudded from the stairs above. Father, and he wasn't alone. I gripped the rusted latch, my knuckles whitening as the basement door creaked open just enough to spill a sliver of lantern light onto the stone steps. Below, the air hung thick with the scent of damp earth and something sharper. Ammonia, maybe from the pails we used for necessities. Eliza's hand trembled in mine, her breaths coming in shallow bursts, but she didn't pull away. We'd waited for this moment after Pa's snores echoed from upstairs, the clock ticking past 2 in the morning. Remember, I whispered, my voice barely cutting the silence. Straight to the window, no looking back. She nodded, her eyes wide like saucers in the dim glow, but there was steel in her jaw now, forged from the stories I'd spun during our late-night huddles under the blankets, the ones about the world beyond Utah's red cliffs where families didn't chain their young to iron rings or measure skulls with calipers. We descended, our bare feet silent on the cold slabs, the lantern swinging from my free hand like a pendulum counting down our luck. The basement stretched out in shadows, partitioned by rough-hewn walls that Ma had called the nursery wards. Rows of cots lined one side, empty now except for the faint outlines of straw mattresses where the others slept. My brothers and sisters, the perfect ones, selected for their straight teeth and clear eyes. But Eliza and I, we were the discards, too small, too frail for Pa's grand vision of a bloodline pure as the Book of Mormon's prophets. A floorboard groaned upstairs and we froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a reminder of the welt still stinging across my back from last week's lesson. Pa had caught me reading his forbidden ledger, the one tallying our heights and temperaments like livestock at auction. God's work ain't for the weak, he'd growled, the switch whistling through the air. But that pain had lit the fire in me, the one that whispered we could run. Find the wagon trails west where no one asked about family trees. Eliza tugged my sleeve, pointing to the far wall where the small barred window winked like a distant star. We'd loosened the bars weeks ago using a shard of slate I'd sharpened on the wall. It wasn't much, a gap just wide enough for our skinny frames, but it was our door to freedom. As we crept closer, a soft whimper drifted from behind a partition. Timothy. My little brother, not yet 5, the one they'd deemed promising with his golden curls. If we left him? No. I shook my head, shoving the thought down. Saving one was miracle enough. 2 might doom us all. But Eliza hesitated, her face crumpling. He cried last night, she murmured, voice cracking. Said the dreams came again, the ones with the locked doors. I knelt, cupping her chin, forcing her gaze to mine. We'll come back for him. All of them. But first we get out. We tell someone, sheriff, preacher, anyone who'll listen. Lies, maybe, but they steadied her. In the Harrington house, truth was a luxury we couldn't afford. We reached the window, the night air seeping through like a promise. I hoisted the lantern higher, wedging the slate into the final bar. It gave with a metallic ping that echoed too loud, and Eliza gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. From the shadows, footsteps pattered, light, uncertain. Timothy emerged, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his nightshirt hanging loose on his thin frame. "We're going," he mumbled, blinking at the light. Panic surged, hot and sharp. I scooped him up, his weight nothing but bones and warmth against my chest. "Shh, adventure," I lied again, glancing at Eliza. Her nod was fierce now, no turning back. 3 of us against the dark, the desert, and whatever Pa's perfect world would hurl our way. The bars clattered free and cool wind rushed in, carrying the faint howl of coyotes. Utah's wilds waited, unforgiving, but ours. I gripped the lantern tighter, its flame flickering like a heartbeat in the damp air as Elias's hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Quiet, Mary," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. The basement stairs creaked under our weight, each step a betrayal echoing back up to the house where Mother and Father thought we slept. But sleep was for the living, not for us who knew the truth buried below. We'd come this far because of the whispers, Elias's mostly, pieced together from stolen glances at Father's journals. He was the brave one, always had been, with his quick laugh that hid the fire in his eyes. I was the cautious shadow, trailing him because the alternative was worse, staying upstairs pretending the cries at night were just wind through the cracks. Tonight, though, caution cracked like old plaster. We'd heard it again after supper. The muffled sob from the locked door at the hall's end, followed by Father's heavy tread descending. The air grew thicker as we reached the bottom, thick with the scent of earth and something sharper like lie and regret. Elias nudged the door ajar, the hinges silent from years of oiling. Inside, the room unfolded in the lantern's glow. Shelves lined with jars of murky fluids, tools glinting on a workbench, scalpel, clamps, things no farmer should own. And in the corner, the cribs. 3 of them, shrouded in white sheets that billowed slightly as if breathing. "Look," Elias hissed, pointing to the smallest one. I crept closer, my heart pounding a rhythm that drowned out the drip of water from the ceiling. The sheet was thinner there, translucent in the light, revealing a tiny form curled inside. Not a baby, not quite. Its limbs too straight, skin pale as milk but marked with faint lines like fresh seams from a tailor's needle. Perfect, Father called them. Perfect children. Bred from his improvements on the weak ones before. I reached out, fingers trembling, and lifted the edge. The child, girl maybe 3 months, stirred, her eyes snapping open. Blue, unnaturally bright, staring right through me. No cry, just a soft coo that twisted in my gut. Elias pulled me back. "Don't wake her. If Father finds us," but it was too late. A shuffle from the far wall behind a curtain of hanging herbs. Father emerged, his silhouette broad and unyielding, the lantern in his hand casting shadows that made his face a mask of hollows. "Mary, Elias." His voice was calm, like reciting scripture, but his eyes, those were storms brewing. "You've come to see the Lord's work." I froze, words tangling in my throat. Elias stepped forward, chin up, that wit of his sharpening like a blade. "Work? This ain't work, Pa, it's sinning against nature." He gestured wildly at the cribs. "What did you do to them?" "To us?" Father didn't flinch. He set the lantern down, the light blooming to reveal more. A ledger open on the table, pages filled with sketches of limbs and measurements, notes on vital essences harvested from the hills. Sin? No, boy, perfection. The saints up top talk of Zion, but they breed weakness into their lines. I fixed that. You 2 were my first successes, strong, clever. But these... He trailed off, pride edging his tone as he approached the crib. The child inside watched him unblinking. I found my voice then, small but steady. "We heard the cries, Pa. The ones that didn't make it. What happened to them?" His hand paused on the sheet, and for a flicker regret shadowed his face. Gone as quick as it came. Sacrifices for the greater. The imperfect must yield to the pure, like the lamb in the temple. He turned to us, expectant, as if we'd join him. Elias's hand found mine, squeezing hard. We weren't leaving empty-handed, not now. But the door behind us was still open, and upstairs Mother stirred. I could feel it like a thread pulling taut. Elias yanked me toward the workbench, grabbing the ledger in one swift motion. "We end this," he muttered. But Father lunged faster than his bulk suggested. The lantern tipped, oil spilling in a dark pool that ignited with a whoosh, flames licking up the shelves. Smoke billowed, stinging my eyes, and in the chaos the children began to wail, a sound like breaking glass, piercing and wrong. We bolted for the stairs. Ledger clutched to Elias's chest, father's shouts chasing us like hounds. The fire spread hungry, devouring the secrets below. But as we burst into the kitchen, Mother waited, her face pale, a knife in hand. Not for us, I prayed, but for whatever came next. The basement door slammed shut behind, locking the inferno in, but the heat seeped through, a promise that perfection's price was only beginning to burn. I gripped the rusted latch, my knuckles white against the damp wood of the basement door. The air down here always carried that metallic tang, like blood mixed with earth, but tonight it felt thicker, pressing against my chest as if the walls themselves were breathing. Pa's voice echoed from the stairs above, sharp and unyielding. Elias, you fetch that lantern now, or I'll tan your hide till it matches the hides we cured last fall. I didn't move. Not yet. The whimpers from below, soft like kittens mewling for milk, had started again, pulling me like a hook through the gut. My fingers trembled as I lifted the latch, the hinges groaning like an old man's complaint. Light from the single candle I'd smuggled flickered across the stone floor, catching on chains bolted into the wall. There they were, the perfects, as Ma called them in her whispering prayers, 3 small forms huddled in the straw, their eyes wide and unblinking, reflecting the flame like polished coins. The oldest, little Amos, whom we'd buried proper just last spring, stared back at me with a gaze that wasn't his. It was sharper, hungrier, as if he'd swallowed something wild from the desert winds outside. Elias! Pa's boot thudded on the top step, closer now. I shoved the door wider, heart pounding like a stampede in my ears. These weren't our kin, not truly. Not after the rituals Ma performed under the harvest moon, chanting words from that yellowed book she'd hidden in the rafters. The perfects didn't cry like normal young'uns. They watched. They learned. They mimicked our every move with eerie precision. Last night I'd seen the middle one, Sarah, no, not Sarah, the replacement, trace the shape of Pa's knife on the wall with her tiny finger, the stone crumbling under her touch as if it were butter. I knelt, whispering, "Quiet now before he hears." But Amos tilted his head, his lips parting in a smile that stretched too wide, teeth already too pointed for a boy of 7. "Brother," he said, voice a rasp that echoed my own but colder. "Why do you hide the light? We need it to grow." Sweat beaded on my forehead. The basement suddenly felt smaller, the ceiling beams sagging like the weight of all our sins. Pa had said they were blessings from the Lord, bred pure in this hole to withstand the alkali flats and the Mormon raiders circling our claim. But blessings didn't make my skin crawl like this. Footsteps thundered down and Pa burst in, his lantern swinging wild, casting shadows that danced like demons. "What in tarnation are you—" His words cut off as he saw them stirring, the perfects rising on spindly legs, their pale skin glowing faintly in the double light. Ma followed, her apron stained with what looked like fresh clay, or worse, her eyes darting between us. "Elias, boy, you weren't to come alone," she hissed, but there was fear in it, not anger. The youngest perfect lunged then, not at me but at Pa's boot, latching on with hands that ended in nails like thorns. Pa yelped, kicking it free, but not before it tore through leather and flesh, drawing blood that sizzled on the stone. "Devils!" he roared, swinging the lantern. Glass shattered, oil blooming into flame that licked up the straw. Heat blasted my face. I grabbed Ma's arm, pulling her back as the perfects shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, scrambling toward the fire instead of away. We stumbled up the stairs, the door slamming shut behind us on chaos, smoke curling through the cracks like vengeful spirits. Pa slumped against the kitchen table, clutching his leg, his face ashen. "They ain't right," he muttered. First time I'd heard doubt in his voice since the mine collapsed and took Uncle Josiah. Ma wrung her hands, whispering apologies to the empty air, but I knew the breeding wasn't done. It was just beginning to unravel us all. Outside, the Utah night howled, and I wondered if the perfects would burst through, remade in the flames, ready to claim what we'd tried to forge. I gripped the rusted latch harder, my knuckles whitening as the door to the sublevel groaned open. Dust motes swirled in the lantern's flicker, revealing stairs that plunged into shadow like veins into the earth. Elias, my older brother, tugged at my sleeve, his breath ragged. "We can't stop now, Sarah. Father's note said the serum's down there, the one that makes us whole." We descended, the air thickening with the scent of damp stone and something sharper, like lie and regret. My heart hammered against my ribs, each step echoing our forbidden pact. Steal the vials, destroy them, end the perfection that had stolen our childhoods. Mother had locked us in the upper cellar for safeguarding, but we'd pried free with a crowbar borrowed from the barn. Elias, always the bold one, led with his chin up, but I saw the tremor in his hands. The basement unfolded into a chamber vast as a chapel, shelves lined with jars. Specimens, Father called them. Floating forms twisted in murky fluid, tiny limbs curled in eternal freeze. I swallowed bile, focusing on the workbench at the far end where glints of glass caught the light. There, Elias whispered, pointing. We crept forward, skirting puddles that seeped from cracks in the floor. As I reached for the first vial, a scrape sounded behind us like boots on gravel. We froze. Father's voice boomed from the stairs, laced with that calm fury he reserved for imperfections. Children, what folly brings you to my sanctum? He stood silhouetted, lantern raised, his shadow stretching like a judgment. Elias shoved me behind a crate, but it was too late. The plan to slip in and out unseen had crumbled in an instant. I clutched the vial I'd snatched, its cool weight a promise of ruin. Father advanced, his eyes gleaming with the same mad clarity that had birthed this nightmare. Perfection demands sacrifice, Sarah. Yours will be the next refinement. Elias lunged, grabbing a loose pipe from the floor, swinging it wide. The clash rang out, metal on lantern, sparks flying as the light shattered. Darkness swallowed us, broken only by the crash of breaking glass and Father's guttural roar. I bolted toward the stairs, vial in hand, Elias's shout urging me on. But as we scrambled up, a hand, cold and unyielding, snagged my ankle, pulling me back into the abyss. The serum slipped from my fingers, shattering below, its contents hissing like venom on stone. We weren't escaping yet. The real trial had just begun. The lantern's flame flickered as I descended the creaky stairs, the air thickening with the metallic tang of blood and something sweeter, like overripe fruit. My boots scraped against the stone floor of the basement, and there she was. Elias's wife, Clara, hunched over the birthing table, her hands slick and trembling as she wiped the newborn's face. The child didn't cry. It never did. Its eyes wide and unnaturally blue locked onto mine the moment I stepped into the light, as if it had been waiting. I froze, my heart pounding like a hammer on anvil. Clara, I whispered, my voice barely cutting through the damp silence. What have you done this time? She didn't look up, just kept murmuring to the infant, her words a jumble of prayers and promises. Elias had sworn this batch would be flawless, no defects, no weaknesses to cull. But perfection in the Harrington line always came at a price, and I could see it in the way the baby's skin gleamed too smoothly, like polished marble under the oil lamp. The basement walls pressed in, lined with shelves of jars, specimens from the failed ones floating in their cloudy brine. I edged closer, my fingers brushing the rough-hewn table where tools lay scattered, scalpels glinting, vials of Elias's elixirs half empty. Clara finally met my gaze, her eyes hollowed by exhaustion. It's perfect, Samuel, she said, her voice cracking. Feel its pulse, strong even. No frailty like the last. I reached out, hesitant, and pressed my palm to the child's chest. The heartbeat thrummed steady, too steady, like a machine whirring beneath flesh. But then it moved. Not a twitch, but a deliberate grasp. Tiny fingers curling around my thumb with a strength that shouldn't belong to something so new. I yanked back, stumbling into a shelf. Jars rattled, one tipping precariously. This isn't right, I muttered, my mind racing back to the screams from nights before, the ones Elias had dismissed as necessary refinements. Upstairs, the family slept, or pretended to, oblivious to the rituals that bound us to this Utah soil, this hidden legacy we'd carried from the old country. Clara stood, cradling the child like a fragile relic. Elias says it's the bloodline's triumph, the purest yet. Her words hung heavy, but doubt flickered in her eyes, the same doubt I'd buried deep in my own gut. Outside, the wind howled through the pioneer town's cracks, carrying whispers of the saints' judgments. If word of this spread, if the elders discovered the basement's secrets, we'd all burn, perfect children or not. I swallowed hard, forcing calm into my voice. We can't keep them all. You know the rules. She nodded, but her arms tightened around the infant. The decision loomed, sharp as the scalpel on the table, and in that moment I wondered if perfection meant losing what made us human, or if it was the lie that would unravel us first. Up the stairs we went, the child's unblinking stare following every step, a silent accusation in the shadows. Elias waited in the parlor, his ledger open, tallying our progress. When he saw the bundle, his face lit with that cold satisfaction. 7, he said, not a question. I nodded, the weight settling like lead in my chest. But as Clara handed it over, the baby's fingers flexed again, brushing Elias's sleeve, and for the first time I saw a crack in his composure. A fleeting shadow of fear. The lantern's flame guttered as I pressed my back against the damp stone wall, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and something fouler, like earth churned from a fresh grave. Elias's labored breaths echoed in the narrow corridor below the house, each one a ragged pull that made my stomach twist. He'd found the ledger first, hidden behind a loose brick in the nursery wall, pages filled with Father's meticulous notes on improvements, dates marking when each of us had been taken, down here for the refinements. I clutched the knife tighter, its handle slick in my palm, wondering if the screams we'd heard earlier were Mother's or just the wind howling through the cracks. Clara, we can't stay here, Elias whispered, his voice a threadbare rasp. He was the brave one, always had been, even after the fever took his left eye last winter. Now that milky socket stared blindly into the shadows as he scanned the basement's labyrinth of rooms. We'd come down to fetch the herbs for Mother's tonic, but the locked door at the far end had changed everything. Behind it, the faint clink of chains and a child's muffled sob. Not ours, not anymore. I nodded, though he couldn't see it in the dim light. My legs trembled, but I forced them to move, stepping over the scattered tools. Scalpels rusted from disuse, vials of murky liquid that Father swore were elixirs from the old country. The challenge wasn't just the darkness or the cold seeping into our bones. It was the knowledge gnawing at us that this place wasn't for storing preserves or mending boots. It was a forge, and we were the metal being shaped. If we didn't get out before dawn, when Father returned from the salt flats with his specimens, we'd be next on the list. We crept forward, the floor uneven underfoot, littered with what felt like small bones crunching softly. Elias led, his hand outstretched like a divining rod, while I held the lantern high. A plan had formed in the attic last night, whispered between us siblings after overhearing Father's rant about perfection through trial. We'd burn the ledger, smash the locks, and flee to the Mormon settlements up north where kin might hide us. But plans were fragile as spider silk down here. The corridor forked and Elias hesitated, his fingers brushing the wall. Left, he said, voice steady despite the sweat beading on his brow. The stairs are that way. I remember the echo from when we were little. But as we turned, a shadow detached from the gloom ahead. Not Father, thank God. But one of the wards, a boy no older than 10, his skin pale as milk, eyes wide and unblinking. He stood there, clad in a rough shift, an iron cuff around one ankle trailing a chain that snaked into the darkness. He didn't speak, just tilted his head as if appraising us. My heart hammered. Was he one of the perfect ones or another failed experiment like the shallow graves we'd glimpsed behind the root cellar? Elias froze, then stepped forward, slow and open-palmed. Easy now. We're not here to hurt you. The boy flinched but didn't run, his gaze flicking to the knife in my hand. I sheathed it quickly, shame burning my cheeks. What's your name? I asked, keeping my tone soft like coaxing a skittish foal. He mumbled something, J. James, and pointed down the hall toward a door half ajar. From within came the low hum of voices, Father's prayer book cadence mixed with a woman's plea. Mother. The stakes sharpened then, a blade at our throats. If we left without her, we'd be running from ghosts forever. But staying meant facing whatever horrors bred in that room. Elias glanced at me, his good eye fierce. We adapt. You take the chain, I'll draw them out. It was grit, pure and simple, the kind that bound us tighter than blood. I knelt, working the lock with a hairpin from my pocket. A trick learned from mending hems now turned to shattering chains. The click echoed like a gunshot, and the boy, James, bolted toward the door, chain rattling free. But as he pushed it open, the voices inside cut off. Footsteps thundered, and Elias shoved me back into the shadows. Go, he hissed, drawing a loose pipe from the floor as a club. The door swung wide, revealing a chamber lit by a single candle, shelves of jars with floating oddities, a table stained dark, and Mother bound to a chair, her face bruised but defiant. Father loomed over her, syringe in hand, his eyes wild with zeal. You've come home early, children, he said, voice calm as a preacher's sermon. The air thickened, tension coiling like a spring. James darted to Mother's side, fumbling at her ropes while Elias charged, pipe swinging. I lunged after, grabbing a jar from the shelf. Its contents sloshed, heavy and viscous, and hurled it at Father's feet. Glass shattered, spilling a foul slurry that made him slip, cursing as he fell. Mother's eyes met mine, a spark of recognition amid the fear. "Run, Clara, take the boy!" But Elias was already grappling, the pipe clanging against stone as Father wrested it away. The fight blurred into chaos, punches landing with dull thuds, James's small hands tearing at knots. I pulled Mother free, her arm limp around my shoulders, and we staggered toward the corridor. Behind us, Elias's cry, not pain but triumph, as he pinned Father long enough for us to flee. We burst into the main basement, the stairs a beacon in the murk, but the lantern's flame flickered low, casting jagged shadows across the stone walls that pressed in like the ribs of some ancient beast. I clutched the iron bar tighter, my knuckles white against the cold metal as Elias's labored breaths echoed from the alcove where we'd dragged him. "Keep pressure on it," I whispered to Mother, though my voice cracked like dry earth under boot. She nodded, her hands stained with his blood, pressing a rag to the gash on his thigh where the trap had snapped shut. Elias, our eldest at 16, bit down on a leather strap, his eyes wild with pain but never leaving mine. Brave boy. Always the brave one, even now. We'd come down here thinking the tunnel would lead to freedom, a forgotten vein in the hillside that Father had mapped years ago for just such a night. But the Mormons' patrols had closed in faster than we'd reckoned, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the dark Utah scrub above. One wrong turn and Elias had triggered the old bear trap, rusted but vicious, left from some miner's ghost story. The challenge wasn't just the wound, it was the noise, the sharp clang that might have carried straight to their ears. If they found the basement entrance, everything we'd built, all the careful selections and quiet berths, would unravel in flames and accusations. "Can't stay here," I muttered, scanning the dim passage ahead. The air grew thicker, laced with the damp rot of earth untouched for decades. Mother's face, etched with lines from too many sleepless vigils, hardened as she tied off the makeshift bandage. "He's losing too much," she said, her voice steady but threaded with that caution she'd always carried, the one that balanced Father's wild ambitions. "We push on or we die sitting." Elias groaned, shifting against the wall, his wit dulled by shock but not gone. "Tell me, you packed the seeds," he rasped, forcing a grin through gritted teeth. The seeds, our code for the vials of preserved traits, the essence of what made our children perfect. Strong lungs for high altitudes, unyielding wills against the desert's cruelty. I helped him to his feet, his arm slung over my shoulder, the weight of him pulling at my own resolve. We were only 4 now, me, Mother, Elias, and little Clara huddled at the rear, her wide eyes reflecting the lantern's glow like polished agate. Father was gone, taken in the raid 2 nights back, his perfection no match for a rifle butt to the skull. The stake wasn't abstract. It was us, our bloodline, the fragile lineage he'd engineered in that basement womb of jars and whispers. Lose Elias and the chain broke. The tunnel sloped downward, the ground slick with seepage that soaked through my boots. My mind raced, piecing together the map from memory. Father's scrawled lines on vellum hidden under floorboards. We'd planned for scarcity, for the isolation of Utah's badlands, but not this. Pursuit in the veins of the mountain itself. A distant rumble echoed. Thunder? Or hooves on the surface? I quickened our pace, the bar swinging at my side like a promise. Clara whimpered, clutching Mother's skirt. "Quiet, love," Mother urged, her hand gentle but firm. "We're the strong ones, remember?" Half an hour in, the passage widened into a chamber, stalactites dripping like slow tears. But our early plan, the straight shot to the eastern slope, backfired here. A collapse barred the way. Boulders tumbled as if the earth itself conspired against us. Dust motes danced in the lantern light, and Elias slumped against a rock, sweat beading on his brow. "Dead end," he coughed, the wit fading. Panic clawed at me, but I shoved it down, scanning the walls. Cracks spiderwebbed the stone, one wider than the rest, exhaling a faint, stale breeze. Not the map's path, but something. "Through there," I said, pointing. Mother eyed it dubiously, her cautious nature flaring. "Too narrow. Elias won't fit." He waved her off weakly. "Push me." Like birthing one of Father's experiments. The words hung heavy. A reminder of the basement's secrets, the selective pains, the perfections forged in isolation. No time for argument. We wedged the bar into the crack, leveraging until stone groaned and parted just enough. Clara went first, small and silent, then Mother, pulling her through. I turned to Elias, hoisting him toward the gap. His blood slicked my hands warm and accusing. As I squeezed in last, the rumble grew louder. Definitely hooves now, voices muffled through the rock. The new passage twisted sharply, the air turning fetid like forgotten roots. We pressed on, my internal litany a grind. Survive, adapt, preserve. But Elias's steps faltered, his breath ragged. The cost was here in his paling face and the trail we left behind. Whatever lay ahead, it wouldn't be clean, perfection never was. The lantern's flame flickered low in the damp basement air, casting jagged shadows that danced like accusations across the stone walls. I clutched the rusted key in my fist, its teeth biting into my palm, while Elias pressed his ear against the heavy oak door at the far end of the chamber. "Hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely cutting through the muffled drip of water from the ceiling. "Scratching. Like nails on wood?" I nodded, my heart pounding against my ribs. We'd come this far. Elias, brave as ever with his miner's pick slung over his shoulder. Little Clara, her wide eyes reflecting the light like polished coins, clutching my skirt. And me, the cautious one, always second-guessing the shadows. The Harrington secrets had lured us here. Whispers from the wagon trail about their perfect children, born not in cradles, but in this very pit beneath their sprawling Utah ranch. The external chill of the 1864 winter had driven us inside seeking shelter, but now the real hazard loomed. Whatever lay behind that door, guarding the family's twisted legacy. Elias jimmied the lock with a tense twist, the mechanism groaning in protest. The door swung inward on protesting hinges, revealing a narrower corridor lined with iron-barred cells. The air thickened with a metallic tang like blood and rust mingled. "Stay close," I murmured to Clara, who trembled but didn't cry. Her grit shining through, a trait she'd inherited from our pa before the fever took him. We stepped in, the lantern swinging to illuminate faded etchings on the walls, crude diagrams of limbs and measurements. Harrington's handiwork, no doubt, charting his experiments on the flawed offspring he'd deemed unfit. A sudden clatter echoed from deeper down, metal on stone. Elias froze, pick raised like a weapon. "Rats?" Clara ventured, her voice small but steady. "Not rats," I said, spotting the glint of eyes in the gloom. Two figures huddled in the nearest cell. Emaciated children no more than 10, their skin pale as milk, limbs twisted unnaturally, as if bones had been set wrong on purpose. One boy reached through the bars, his fingers elongated and claw-like, scraping at the air toward us. "Help. Make us perfect," he rasped, his words a plea laced with something feral. Elias recoiled, but I stepped forward, the challenge hitting me like a gust from the desert outside. These weren't monsters. They were victims of the Harrington's madness, bred in isolation to forge some ideal pioneer stock, stronger, unyielding against the harsh frontier. But the cost was etched in their hollow cheeks and scarred flesh. "We're getting you out," I told them, fumbling for the cell key on a hook nearby. My hands shook. One wrong move, and the family's patriarch could return from his evening rounds, his rifle at the ready. As the bars creaked open, the girl inside lunged, not in attack but desperation, wrapping her arms around Clara. "They cut us," she whimpered. "To fix the weakness." Clara hugged back, her caution melting into fierce protectiveness. But then a low rumble shook the floor. Footsteps heavy and approaching from the corridor's end. Elias swung his lantern, spotting a silhouette. Old man Harrington himself, his face a mask of righteous fury, shotgun leveled. "Intruders in my sanctuary," he growled, his voice echoing like judgment from the pulpit. "You meddle with God's work," Elias charged, pick swinging in a wide arc that forced Harrington back a step. But the blast of the shotgun tore through the air, splintering wood and sending us diving for cover. Pellets whizzed past, one grazing my arm in a hot sting. The children screamed, scattering into the shadows, their perfection unraveling in chaos. I grabbed Clara, pulling her toward a side alcove while Elias grappled with the madman, their struggle a blur of grunts and blows. In the frenzy, I spotted a lever on the wall, rusted, marked with Harrington's scrawled notes. Flood release. The basement sat atop an underground spring, a resource the family had damned for their rituals. Heart racing, I yanked it down. Water surged from hidden grates, icy and relentless, rising fast around our ankles. Harrington howled as the tide pulled at him, his grip on Elias slipping. "No, my children!" We waded through the flood, herding the escaped pair ahead, Clara's hand tight in mine. The water climbed to our knees, then waists carrying debris and secrets alike. Elias broke free, shoving Harrington against the bars, but the old man's eyes locked on his flawed creations with a mix of horror and pride. "You'll drown them all," he spat. "Better than your perfection." Elias shot back, witty even in peril, as he bashed the shotgun from Harrington's grasp. The current swept stronger, forcing us toward the main stairs. One child slipped, his twisted legs failing him, but Clara dove back, her small frame hauling him up with a strength that belied her years. We burst into the upper kitchen as the basement filled, the door slamming shut behind us on the rising deluge. Harrington's muffled cries faded below, a consequence we couldn't unmake. Outside, the Utah night wind howled, but we were free, scarred, soaked, but unbroken. The Harrington legacy would sink with its architect, leaving us to face the trail ahead, forever changed by the basement's truths. I gripped the rusted latch harder, my knuckles whitening against the damp wood of the basement door. Father's voice echoed from below, sharp and unyielding, calling out measurements like an auctioneer. Height, weight, the curve of a jawline, as if bartering souls. Eliza tugged at my sleeve, her eyes wide in the lantern's flicker, whispering, "Elias, we can't go down there again. Not after what we saw last night." But I shushed her, heart pounding like a miner's pick, because the cries we'd heard weren't just echoes. They were our siblings, the ones Father deemed flawed and dragged away to perfect in the dark. The stairs creaked under my boots as I descended first, the air thickening with the scent of lye and something metallic, like blood mixed with earth. Mother was there at the workbench, her hands steady as she adjusted the straps on little Thomas, our youngest brother, his small chest rising and falling too quickly. "He's almost ready," she murmured without looking up, her voice a threadbare quilt over the horror. I wanted to shout, to demand why we were complicit in this madness, but the words stuck, choked by the memory of Father's belt and his sermons on legacy, on forging a bloodline pure enough for the promised valleys. Eliza followed close, her breath hot on my neck, and we huddled in the shadows near the clay vats, where the imperfects were molded, bones reset, features carved like statues in some unholy foundry. Thomas whimpered as Mother injected something clear from a vial, his eyes fluttering shut. "This one's for the harvest," she said, more to herself than us. I exchanged a glance with Eliza. Her caution had always balanced my recklessness, but now it fueled my resolve. We had to end it tonight before the next birth under the full moon. Father emerged from the far alcove, wiping his hands on his apron stained with what looked like rust, his eyes narrowing at us. "Elias, girl, come to witness progress." His tone was earnest, almost proud, as if we were admiring a new plow. I stepped forward, forcing a nod while my mind raced. The dynamite we'd smuggled from the mine shaft hidden in the root cellar above. One spark, and the basement secrets would bury themselves forever. But Eliza's hand trembled in mine, and I wondered if our grit would hold against the family we'd bleed for. As Father turned back to his tools, I whispered to her, "When he checks the vats, we light it. No turning back." She swallowed hard, her wit deserting her for once, replaced by a fierce nod. The air hummed with tension, the single lantern casting long shadows that danced like accusations. Thomas stirred faintly, a perfect child in the making, and I felt the weight of what we'd destroy, not just the horror but the fragile thread tying us to this cursed land. We moved then, silent as ghosts in the Mormon dust, slipping toward the stairs. Father's hammer struck metal, a rhythmic clang that masked our footsteps, but halfway up, Eliza's boot caught an uneven plank. It groaned, loud as a confession. Father spun, his face twisting from pride to fury. "What are you hiding?" he bellowed, charging after us. I shoved Eliza ahead, my mind screaming plans A through Z, but all I had was instinct. Grabbing a loose iron bar from the wall, swinging it low to buy time. The blow connected with his knee, a sickening crack that echoed louder than the cries below. He howled, crumpling, but Mother was there in an instant. Her caution turned to venom as she lunged with a scalpel glinting in the light. "Traitors to the blood!" she spat, slashing wildly. Eliza dodged, pulling me back, and we bolted up the stairs. The basement door slamming shut behind us just as Father's weight hit it from below. Outside, the Utah night pressed cold and vast, stars indifferent witnesses to our flight. We ran toward the wagon, hearts hammering, the dynamite bundle heavy in my arms, but as we lit the fuse, short, desperate. The explosion's rumble shook the earth, flames licking up from the foundations like Judgment Day. Dust and screams mingled, then silence, broken only by Eliza's sobs. We'd saved Thomas, maybe, but the cost carved deep. A family shattered, a legacy in ruins, and the valley's whispering of ghosts in the basements yet to come. The lantern's flame sputtered in the damp air, casting shadows that clawed at the stone walls like desperate fingers. I gripped the iron bar tighter, my knuckles white as Elias's labored breaths echoed from the alcove ahead. He'd found the hidden panel behind the false shelf. Years of prying and whispering secrets to the walls had paid off. But now, with the mechanism jammed, we were exposed. The children's muffled cries seeped through the cracks, a chorus that twisted my gut. "Push harder," I hissed to him, my voice barely above the creak of rusted hinges. Elias, ever the stubborn one, wedged his shoulder against the door, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. It gave way with a groan that rattled the jars lining the shelves. Those cursed vessels holding remnants of what Father called imperfect trials. Glass shattered underfoot as we stumbled into the chamber beyond, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and something sweeter, like overripe fruit. The breeding room. Rows of crude cradles lined the walls, each swaddled in stained linens, and in the center the birthing chair loomed like a throne from hell, its straps frayed but still stained dark. Mother stood there, her back to us, humming a lullaby I'd heard since childhood, her hands busy with a squirming bundle on the table. "Elias, look out!" I lunged as the figure detached from the shadows, a hulking shape. Not quite man, not quite the perfect son Father had engineered from stolen brides and forbidden rites. It was Amos, or what was left of him. His skin stretched taut over unnatural muscle, eyes glowing with that unnatural fervor. He swung a meat hook from the wall, the curved blade whistling through the air. Elias dodged, but the hook grazed his arm, tearing fabric and flesh in one swipe. Blood sprayed, hot and slick, and I swung my bar, connecting with the thing's knee. It buckled but didn't fall, snarling with teeth too sharp, too many. Mother turned then, her face serene as a saint's in a stained glass window, but her eyes cold, calculating, fixed on me. "Clara, my dear, you've come to witness the next perfection." The bundle in her arms writhed, a tiny form with limbs that bent wrong, skin pale as moonlight. She held it up like an offering, and I saw the marks, incisions along its spine, fresh and weeping, just like the diagrams in Father's journals. Elias groaned, clutching his wound, but he nodded toward the far wall, where a grate led to the underground spring, the one we'd mapped in stolen moments. "The water, it weakens them," he gasped, remembering the old miner's tale about the mineral veins that burned unnatural flesh. I feinted left, drawing Amos's attention, his hook embedding in the table with a thud that shook the room. Mother stepped forward, cooing to the child, but I charged, bar raised, slamming it into her shoulder. She crumpled, the infant tumbling free, its cries piercing like needles. Elias scrambled, scooping it up despite his pain, and bolted for the grate. I followed, kicking at Amos as he rose, his form convulsing. The thing's hand caught my ankle, dragging me back, nails like claws digging in. Pain flared, but I twisted, driving my heel into its eye. It howled, releasing me just enough to crawl free. We pried the grate open, the cold rush of the spring air hitting us like a slap. Elias dropped the child into the shallow flow first. It splashed, then stilled, the unnatural vigor fading as the minerals worked their quiet poison. Amos thrashed behind us, the chamber filling with his rage, but the water's edge held him at bay, his skin blistering where it touched. Mother rose, whispering incantations, but her voice cracked, the first real fracture in her unyielding facade. I pulled Elias through, sealing the grate with a bar wedged tight, their screams fading into gurgles. We didn't stop until the tunnel spit us into the moonlit scrubland above the homestead, the night wind carrying the scent of sage and freedom. My ankle throbbed, Elias's arm bound with strips from my petticoat, and the weight of what we'd unleashed settled like stones in my chest. The children below, the ones we couldn't reach, their fates hung unresolved, a shadow that would trail us into whatever dawn we chased. But for now we ran, two siblings forged in secrecy, toward the distant lights of the wagon trail. The lantern's flame guttered low in my hand, casting jagged shadows across the damp stone walls as I crept down the final flight of stairs. Elias's breathing rasped behind me, too loud in the stifling air, and I shot him a glare that he ignored. His face set in that stubborn jawline he'd inherited from Pa, broad and unyielding like the Wasatch Peaks outside. We'd come this far, slipping past Ma's watchful eyes and the locked door at the top, driven by the whispers we'd overheard. The final rite for little Theo. The one they deemed flawless enough to carry the bloodline forward. My stomach twisted at the thought, the metallic tang of fear coating my tongue. If we didn't stop it tonight, there'd be no more Harringtons like us. Flawed, human, alive. Elias gripped my shoulder, his fingers digging in like iron clamps. Quiet, Sarah. One wrong step and they'll hear us. His voice was a low growl, laced with the caution he'd always carried. Ever since the day Pa had dragged him down here for his assessment and left him bruised but unbroken. I nodded, though my heart hammered against my ribs. The basement stretched out before us, a warren of chambers lit by flickering gas lamps, the air thick with the scent of lye and something sweeter, like overripe fruit. We'd mapped it in stolen moments, piecing together the layout from the children's muffled cries and the elders' chants filtering up through the floorboards. Tonight we aimed for the heart. The breeding room where Ma and Uncle Josiah waited with their tools and their twisted prayers. We pressed against the wall as footsteps echoed from the adjacent hall, Pa, no doubt, his heavy boots thudding like judgment. I held my breath, the lantern's heat searing my palm until the sound faded. Elias moved first, darting to the next corner with the grace of a coyote, his wiry frame slipping through the gloom. I followed, my skirts catching on a jutting nail that tore the fabric with a soft rip. No time to curse it. The door to the breeding room loomed ahead, oak reinforced with iron bands, a simple latch we'd planned to jimmy with the wire Elias had pilfered from the barn. But as we reached it, a new sound pierced the quiet. Theo's wail, high and piercing, cut short by a slap. God's work demands purity. Ma's voice drifted through the woods, serene as a hymn but edged with steel. You'll thank us when you're whole. Elias's eyes met mine, wild with fury. He jammed the wire into the latch, twisting with frantic precision, but the mechanism jammed, rusted shut from disuse or deliberate sabotage. Sweat beaded on his forehead and he whispered a curse, yanking harder. The wire snapped with a faint twang that echoed like a gunshot in my ears. Footsteps again, closer this time, and a shadow stretched long across the threshold. Run! I hissed, shoving him toward the side passage we'd scouted as an escape. But Elias shook his head, stubborn as ever, and pulled the knife from his belt, the one he'd sharpened on river stones for weeks. Not without him. Before I could argue, the door creaked open from within and Uncle Josiah's bulk filled the frame, his eyes narrowing in the lamplight. He was a mountain of a man, bearded and Bible-bound, but tonight his face twisted in surprise rather than piety. Sarah? Elias? What heresy is this? Elias lunged, the knife flashing, but Josiah was faster, swatting it aside with a meaty forearm that sent the blade skittering across the floor. I grabbed a loose brick from the wall, my arms burning as I swung it high, connecting with his knee in a crunch of bone. He bellowed, staggering, and Elias tackled him, the two crashing into the room in a tangle of limbs and grunts. Ma shrieked from inside, her silhouette rising like a specter, clutching Theo to her chest, the boy pale and wide-eyed, his small body wrapped in white linens stained with what looked like blood. I scrambled after them, the lantern swinging wildly, illuminating the horror, shelves lined with jars of murky fluids, diagrams of limbs and torsos sketched in charcoal on the walls, and the birthing table slick with fresh oil. Theo's eyes locked on mine, pleading, and something in me snapped. I charged Ma, wresting the boy from her arms as she clawed at my face, nails raking fire across my cheek. You can't. He's perfect, the line ends with him. Elias grappled with Josiah, fists flying in a blur of earnest desperation, each blow landing with the weight of years suppressed. Blood sprayed from Josiah's nose, but he fought back, pinning Elias against the table with a roar. I backed away with Theo clutched tight, his tiny hands fisting in my hair, and kicked over a shelf as I went. Jars shattered, spilling their contents in acrid waves that made my eyes water and Ma cough, doubling over. Fire, I yelled, the word born of pure instinct, though we had none. But the lie worked. Ma's face drained of color, her zeal fracturing into panic. Josiah hesitated, glancing at the spreading puddle, and Elias twisted free, slamming an elbow into his throat. The big man gurgled, slumping, and Elias was on him again, binding his wrist with a strip torn from his own shirt. We didn't wait for Pa's arrival. Elias scooped up the knife, and I held Theo as we bolted for the stairs, the boy's weight a warm anchor against the chaos. Alarms would raise soon, the family elders converging like wolves, but we'd bought time, cracked the facade of their perfection. The lantern's flame guttered low in my trembling hand, casting jagged shadows across the stone walls that had been my prison and my forge for so long. Elias lay slumped against the far wall, his chest rising in shallow, ragged bursts, the iron manacle still biting into his wrist where I'd finally pried it loose with the shard of quartz I'd hidden in my sleeve for weeks. Blood slicked the floor between us. Not just his from the struggle, but mine too from the gash where Mother had slashed at me with her shears before I could wrestle them away. Pa's body was a still mound in the corner, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, the weight of his own legacy finally crushing him when he lunged for the door. I knelt beside Elias, pressing a wad of torn petticoat to the wound on his side. "Hold on," I whispered, my voice cracking like dry earth under boot. "We're getting out. No more perfect children, no more of their lies." His eyes fluttered open, that wry spark I'd always admired flickering back to life amid the pain. He was the only one who'd ever questioned the rituals, the measurements, the endless nights of whispers about bloodlines and divine selection. Brave fool that he was, he'd slipped me notes under the door, words of rebellion scratched in charcoal. They can't breed what's already broken free. Footsteps echoed from above, heavy, deliberate, not Mother's frantic patter. Uncle Josiah, no doubt, come to restore order after the screams had torn through the house. The basement door creaked, a sliver of moonlight piercing the gloom like an accusation. I froze, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the faint, sickly sweet residue of the herbs they'd forced down our throats to purify us. Elias gripped my arm, his fingers weak but insistent. "The tunnel," he rasped. "Now." We'd found it months ago, a crumbling vein in the rock behind the old cider press, too narrow for Pa's bulk but wide enough for us if we squeezed. It had been our secret dream, a way out from under the weight of their expectations. The Harrington name, the perfect progeny they bred like prize livestock in this god-forsaken Utah hollow. I helped Elias to his feet, his weight leaning heavy on me, every step a fire in my lungs. The tunnel mouth yawned black, swallowing the lantern's light as we crawled in, stones scraping skin already raw. Behind us the door burst open. Josiah's voice boomed, laced with that false piety. "Elara, boy, you can't run from God's plan." His boots thudded closer, the beam of his own lantern sweeping the floor, catching the glint of blood trails we'd left. I shoved Elias forward, his body scraping through the narrow gap, and twisted to face the light. In my hand, the shears, sharp, cold, an extension of the rage I'd buried under years of compliance. He lunged, but I was faster, the tool slicing across his arm as I backed into the dark. A howl echoed, but we were moving, the tunnel narrowing until it felt like rebirth in reverse, earth pressing close, air stale and cool. Elias coughed ahead, his breaths labored, but he kept pulling himself along, muttering encouragements that sounded like prayers. Almost. Free air. Remember the stars? The passage widened abruptly, spitting us into a ravine under the vast Utah sky, the moon a silver sickle overhead. We collapsed against jagged rocks, the night alive with coyote calls and the whisper of wind through sagebrush. Elias's wound wept dark, and I tore more cloth to bind it tighter. My hands steady now, forged in the fire we'd escaped. No more measurements of skulls or charts of ideal traits. No more breeding for their twisted perfection. Dawn crept over the horizon as I dragged him toward the distant flicker of a campfire. Mormon settlers, maybe, or wanderers who'd take us in. Elias squeezed my hand, his voice a thread. "We did it, Elara. Broke the mold." I nodded, the weight of the basement lifting like mist, though I knew the scars would linger, the questions from any who found the house above. But here, under open sky, we were our own makers, imperfect, alive, and finally unbound.